Steffi Graf stood frozen. The woman who conquered Berlin for decades struck silent by a 19-year-old from Manila. What Eala unleashed inside that stadium didn't just echo through the crowd, it shook the entire foundation of tennis history. Nobody anticipated a young Filipina stepping onto German soil and commanding it like she was born there. Nobody predicted those two words, spoken in flawless, heartfelt German, would detonate a roar so thunderous that Steffi Graf, the woman who defined what German tennis greatness means, could only press her palm to her chest and blink back something she hadn't felt in years. Emotion. Raw, unscripted, overwhelming emotion. This wasn't just a match. This wasn't just a post-victory speech. This was the moment a new chapter of women's tennis tore itself open, and the world watched, breathless. She didn't arrive in Berlin whispering. Eala touched down in Germany not as a tourist, not as a hopeful qualifier clinging to a wildcard dream. She arrived as a statement. A young woman shaped by Manila's heat, Rafael Nadal's academy in Mallorca, and a burning, relentless belief that the world's biggest stages weren't reserved for the privileged, they belonged to those obsessed enough to earn them. But here's what made Berlin different from every other tournament on the calendar. Berlin carries weight that most cities simply cannot replicate. This is the city where Steffi Graf dismantled opponents with ruthless precision for over a decade, where German tennis built its cathedral, where crowds don't applaud talent, they consecrate it. For a Filipina teenager to walk into that environment without flinching already told you something profound about who Eala is beneath the baseline ground strokes and the viral highlight reels. She had been preparing for this, not just physically, culturally. In the weeks preceding the tournament, sources close to her camp revealed that Eala had been quietly studying German, not phrasebook-level tourism German, conversational German. German spoken with warmth, with respect, with the deliberate intention of reaching people on their own terms. Her coach reportedly called it the smartest thing she's done off the court. Her teammates were stunned. Her sponsors didn't know. Even the press hadn't caught wind of it yet. Berlin's tennis faithful, meanwhile, studied her record with polite skepticism. Talented, yes. Exciting, absolutely. But this was their city, their court, their legacy. A legacy sculpted over generations by European precision and pedigree. What did Eala know about that? They were about to find out. When she stepped into her first press conference, Eala wore the quiet confidence of someone carrying a secret. She answered questions professionally, smiled with measured grace, deflected speculation about nerves with a disarming laugh. "I feel at home on any court," she said simply. "Tennis is my language." Nobody realized yet that she meant that far more literally than they understood. The draw had placed her on a collision course with the tournament's sentimental favorite, a German wildcard who had captured Berlin's affection with her aggressive baseline play and unmistakable hometown energy. The crowd would be partisan. The atmosphere would be electric. The pressure would be immense. Eala's response to learning her first-round opponent? She smiled, nodded once, and went back to her notebook. There are players who shrink beneath the weight of occasion. Then there are players who absorb occasion like oxygen. Berlin was about to discover, in the most electric fashion imaginable, exactly which category Eala occupied. The atmosphere inside the arena that afternoon was cathedral quiet before the coin toss, then volcanic the moment the first ball left a racket. Berlin's crowd brought everything. Flags, chants, synchronized rhythmic clapping that transformed the stands into something between a football stadium and an opera house. The home favorite fed off every point, every winner, every deuce, receiving wall after wall of sonic encouragement that would have destabilized most competitors within 20 minutes. Eala walked into it like she'd rehearsed this specific atmosphere 1,000 times. What unfolded across those 2 hours and 17 minutes was, by every metric available, one of the most riveting matches women's tennis had witnessed on German clay in recent memory. Not because it was technically flawless. Both players made errors under pressure. Both players gifted games they should have closed. But because of the conversation the match conducted between two contrasting styles, two contrasting stories, and two contrasting visions of what tennis greatness looks like. Eala's forehand arrived like punctuation at the end of arguments. Her footwork reorganized itself between each exchange with a fluidity that drew gasps from a crowd that hadn't arrived expecting to be impressed. When she broke serve in the second set to wrestle momentum back from a deficit that looked insurmountable, the Berlin faithful, for just a flicker, applauded. Not for their own player, for the quality they had witnessed. That moment mattered. Berlin crowds do not applaud opponents easily. Between games, television cameras caught Eala at her chair, not slumped, not anxious, not frantically consulting with her box. She sat with her towel folded deliberately across her knee, breathing slowly, eyes closed, lips moving slightly. Whether she was rehearsing strategy or rehearsing something else entirely, nobody seated in that stadium could have guessed. The third set arrived like a verdict. Each player elevated simultaneously, as though both understood that ordinary tennis was insufficient for the occasion demanding their best. Points stretched beyond 20 shots. Winners arrived from positions that should have produced errors. The crowd, partisan at the outset, gradually transformed into something rarer and more beautiful, an audience simply present for excellence, regardless of nationality. When Eala's final backhand clipped the line on match point, the stadium reacted in the only honest way a crowd can respond to something extraordinary, with noise that transcended allegiance. Applause from a Berlin crowd for Alex Eala, on clay, in a city where the history of greatness hung visible in the rafters. She raised her racket. She looked at the sky. She exhaled. Then she walked toward the microphone for her on-court interview, and everything changed. But let's pause here, because the most important conversation this moment generated wasn't about tennis at all. It was about belonging. Modern professional tennis operates within a peculiar contradiction. The sport celebrates internationalism, players from 60 nations competing on every continent, ranked by a system blind to passport color. Yet the culture of major tournaments, the historic weight of clay courts and grass courts and indoor arenas, carries a distinctly European center of gravity that players from Asia, Africa, and Latin America navigate with varying degrees of comfort and resistance. Alex Eala grew up inside that system. She trained at an academy in Spain. She competed on European clay during formative adolescent years. She absorbed languages, customs, court surfaces, and cultural expectations while simultaneously maintaining the Filipino identity that shaped her fundamental character. She learned, the way only those who belong to multiple worlds simultaneously can learn, that belonging isn't granted, it's built. Brick by brick, word by word, genuine gesture by genuine gesture. Her decision to speak German in Berlin wasn't spontaneous. People close to her confirmed she had practiced those sentences repeatedly in the weeks prior, had consulted native speakers about pronunciation, had deliberated over word selection with the precision of someone who understood that what you say matters infinitely less than how sincerely you mean it. This raises an uncomfortable question that tennis's governing bodies would benefit from sitting with. How many players from non-European backgrounds carry the burden of earning their belonging at tournaments where European players simply arrive already belonging? Eala's response to that burden was characteristically elegant. Rather than resenting it, she transformed it into connection. Rather than demanding acceptance, she extended love first. The result was not merely a crowd responding warmly to a gesture. The result was a genuine dismantling of the invisible wall that separates visitors from participants in the story of European tennis culture. When Graf stood speechless, what she witnessed wasn't just a skillful athlete performing a charming cultural courtesy. She witnessed the future of tennis, demonstrating how internationalism, real internationalism, looks when practiced by someone with the emotional intelligence to execute it without calculation. Tennis needed that demonstration. Perhaps sports broadly needed it. And a 19-year-old from Manila delivered it on clay in Berlin without a press release, a management strategy, or a social media blueprint. She delivered it with sincerity, preparation, and two perfectly pronounced words. Here is what will be remembered about Berlin long after the tournament concludes, long after rankings shift and seasons change, and new rivalries emerge to command attention. Alex Eala gave tennis a story it cannot tell enough. Not a story about a score, not a story about a ranking, not a story about a title. A story about what sport becomes when the humans inside it choose depth over performance, connection over strategy, and love, that precise word Graf chose, over calculation. The legacy of this moment operates on multiple simultaneous frequencies. For Filipino tennis, it represents confirmation of something the country's sporting faithful have argued for years, that Eala isn't simply talented by local standards, she is extraordinary by global standards, and her journey has only just genuinely begun. Berlin was not a ceiling. Berlin was a foundation. For German tennis, it provided something unexpectedly precious, a reminder of why the sport generates the kind of devotion that fills stadiums and silences legends, not because of statistics, but because of moments, specific, irreducible human moments that resist reduction to data. For Steffi Graf, personally, and this deserves its own reflection, the moment offered a rare mirror. She built her legacy through ferocity, precision, and an almost inhuman consistency that produced 18 Grand Slam titles. Her relationship with Berlin's tennis culture is written in decades of achievement. But watching Eala's speech, Graf appeared to encounter something her own career, magnificent as it was, didn't quite produce in the same register. The sight of a young woman choosing to honor the history she inherited rather than simply compete within it. That's not a criticism of Graf's era. It's a recognition of how differently this generation approaches the sport's emotional dimensions. For tennis itself, the moment arrives at a genuinely pivotal juncture. The sport is actively seeking its next generation of standard bearers, players capable of commanding not just courts, but conversations. Players who generate attention beyond the boundaries of the tennis-watching community and pull new audiences into the sport's orbit. Alex Eala, in 47 seconds on a Berlin court, demonstrated precisely that capacity. Not by accident, not by management design, by character. The question the sport now carries forward isn't whether Eala will win Grand Slams. That conversation will unfold its own timeline through its own drama and difficulty and triumph. The question is something richer, more permanent, more important. In a world desperately hungry for athletes who lead with humanity before talent, has tennis just found its defining voice for a generation? Watch the comments below. The world clearly has thoughts.